Hey and welcome here to Python Advanced Programming. This series of videos here will build on top of the Python Learning by Doing. That is a series of 26 small sessions that will teach you all the basic programming skills for Python. But here in this series, now it's time to start to use it. And we will make our very first programs here. And I will take you through it all the way from defining the scope of the project all the way to breaking down what are the different things and tools we need to use to make these programs and what do we want to end up with. In this video here, I will focus on 3 different techniques that are important to learn when you make software. The first one here is how do you make a graphical user interface using a software here called Qt Designer. And here's an example where I simply by having different widgets here can pull them over and use them to very fast make a nice user interface with a calendar widget in the top, some input fields and a checkbox, and then a submit button at the end. How do we make that user interface? We will also try to link pages together so that, for instance, here, if I have made a user interface that has a main page and I click either input fuel or input maintenance task or input other expenses, then it jumps to another page. And how do we make that connection between our graphical user interfaces we made in Qt Designer? So we want this function here, input fuel, and then it jumps to a new page here where I can type in my fuel consumption and my mileage. The third thing we want to do is we want to make it so that when we have our input file with a lot of text field or input fields, that we can choose a date, we can choose an odometer reading, we can choose a fuel amount, and we can choose a fuel cost and some text and check whether it's a full tank or not. And then when we submit, we want to store the data over in our fuel.csv file. And as you see here, the entry I just made, it made a new entry line to my text file or CSV file. Before starting any programming, let's talk a little business case for making a program or an app for cost and maintenance tracking for RVers. See, I'm an RVer myself, and I do keep track on my iPad in a little spreadsheet, as you see here on the screen. And it's very sensitive. I can easily change the formatting or do something that messes the spreadsheet up. So I would like a real program that runs as an app on my iPad. And if I have that need, I would suppose that a lot of other RVers would have the same need. So what would be my business goal for an app like this? Well, if I look at the market size, there are 47.9 million RVers in US. And if I set a goal over 3 years to sell this app to, let's say, now 1 out of every 2,000 RVers over 3 years, and if I sell it for $4.99 per download, then it would be a total earning potential of $119,610 seen over a 3 years time period. So that would be the goal. So what do I want the app to do? Well, I want it to run as an app on an iPad. I would limit it to that. Other platforms can come later. Then I want it to keep track of fuel cost and my mileage. I want to keep track of maintenance, both the schedule for maintenance and the repair cost. And here we are talking both planned maintenance and unplanned maintenance. I also wanted to keep track of other costs defined by the user. And they need to be able to define other cost types like campground fees, propane, electricity, or it could be payments on the RV, etc. And I also wanted to be able to give a reminder of planned maintenance for each month, so you can kind of make a maintenance schedule. I also have to think about how to make the sales happen. My plan here would be to sell this through the Apple Store as an app, and to make it known, do some marketing about it. It doesn't sell itself. You need to tell people it's there. So I want to write 20 articles each year in relevant social media groups about the true cost of RVing, with examples from my own 1-year cost. And then I will include some links to the app. I also want to make 2 YouTube videos, one about true cost of RVing, and then another video about preventive maintenance for RVers. And on top of that, then it's about staying active in these groups here on the social medias and participate in discussions about these topics, and use every opportunity to refer people to this app. You could see here in the business case, I had an expectation to earn perhaps about 120,000 over 3 years on this app. I would like to get some more earnings in, so it won't stand alone. I would have to make perhaps 4 of these kind of apps during a year, but that means the rest of the time here I would really have to spend on marketing. I need to be very active on social medias and so on, in relevant groups, to try to promote and tell about this app so it gets sold. And for those of you who have followed my series called Python Learning by Doing, the introduction series to Python programming, there will be a lot of that stuff that we will use here to create this program. And I will try to go through them one by one here. First of all, we will use both string variables for storing text content, and we will also use number variables. But I foresee that we will also be using the classes. That's where we can define characteristics about a certain thing. So that could be, for instance, maintenance types, where we define maintenance types in a class. So we have the string variables, the number variables, and the classes. All the data that we work with in this program, we need to store that in a certain way. We can work with databases, or we can store it in simple text files. And in this example here, I simply want to just store it in text files. So there might be multiple text files that we use for storage of different data types. So we will have to use the functionality we have learned about how to write data from a variable into a text file, and we will also have to use the functionality and how to retrieve it, pull it back out so we can show it. All the data that we store in these text files here, we want to store in an organized way. And one of the ways we can do that is by using lists. So lists, they can store both text strings, but they can also store numbers. So we will use that for storage of all our data in these text files. We will also have to build some functions, and the functions, they are kind of the whole logic behind the program. So when I type in miles driven and how many gallons of fuel we have purchased, this needs to be calculated into a miles per gallon that we later can present. So the whole logic there will be in functions. There will be if sentences used, because for the maintenance schedule, I want to know if a certain date is bigger than another date, then we have to call out a maintenance task. In the training, we also looked at how to work with modules and how to import modules. And I would suggest that we do that here as well. I would like so that when we type in the mileage and the fuel consumption and all that and the maintenance tasks, that we have a graphical interface, user interface. So it's not just a text prompt, but that we actually have a nice graphical user interface. So we will have to import a module that allows us to work with graphical interfaces and learn how to do that. Another thing I would like to import is a module for making graphs. I would like to have the fuel consumption shown as a bar chart so that we type in a certain time period and then we can get the fuel consumption for that time period shown as a bar chart. And at the end here, when we have finished our entire program, we will have a lot of files in a project folder. And then we need to take a module that can actually compile that into one executable file. In this example here, it won't be a Windows exe file. Instead, we want it to compile it into something that can be an app that runs on an iPad. So that would be the last step. Let's grab a cup of coffee. And then let's just get going. It's now time to get started with the actual programming. And the first thing to do is to create a project. I've created a project here called RV_cost_tracker. And the way you do that is simply to go up in File, New Project, and then here you replace the default suggestion with the name you want to give your project. The next thing we want to do is to install the two modules we expect to use. You remember we wanted a graphical interface module, and here I want to use something called tkinter, and there is also the Matplotlib module for creating the bar charts. So we need those modules installed. And to install modules, that's always from a command prompt. So we get the command prompt and we say run as administrator. That's important. Allow it to make changes. And here to install these programs, it's the pip function we use. So it's pip install. And then this tkinter is called pyt, pyqt5. That's what it's called. And then just enter. And I have already installed it, so it says it's already satisfied. The next is to install something called the Qt Designer. The Qt Designer is the graphical interface or the software where you design your graphical interfaces in. And it has to be PIP, and then it's pyqt5. No, we need the install. I make the same mistake again. Install pyqt5 and then dash and tools. And if you have followed the Python learning by doing, you might already have installed the last module called Matplotlib. That's the one creating graphs. But if not, then it's time to install it now. So we say pip install and Matplotlib. And then enter. And again, I have it already, so it just confirms it. The Qt Designer software that is used for the graphical interfaces is a program that will be used again and again. So I actually did something. I created a shortcut for it on my desktop so that I can just double click that every time I want to open it instead of having to go into a command prompt and write the whole path. So I went into my Windows Explorer, simply wrote designer.exe and make sure you're standing in Windows C in the root and then just search. And you can see in my case I got 2 hits because I have made the shortcut already. But here you can see where it's under user and so on. You have the full path to it there. And you can just right click it and show more options here. And then we can say create shortcut. So if you do that, you create a shortcut and then copy that shortcut out to your desktop. Then it's easy to find. And when you have that, you can see here is your Designer X shortcut, and you can just double click that one to open your program. And now you are in this Designer interface for making user interfaces. And now it's time to start the actual programming. And I will go faster ahead than when I did the Python learning by doing. I won't show you all the programming. I will show you more the results of each file I make and explain what I'm doing. So to understand what's going on beyond this point here, I would definitely recommend you to follow this whole series here called Python Learning by Doing. It's my channel here on YouTube as well, and I have 26 episodes. You can see all these here that each cover a certain topic, and it's basically all the basic knowledge you need to understand what's going on when we are making software in Python. So if you haven't done it yet, go to module number 1 here and then start up that first one. It will show you which software to install, which editor to use, how to install Python on your computer, and then each chapter will lead to the next, and you just follow the whole series through. That should give you the basic knowledge. Well, with the Qt Designer installed, it's now time to start making the graphical interface. The way it works is that you kind of have the graphical interface, and we'll make that first with the whole layout, all the boxes for typing in for information and so on, and also the frames where we want to display information. And we need multiple pages. We need like a main page, and then we from that one need to make links to a page where we can type in the fuel consumption, one where we can type in when we do maintenance tasks, and so on. So there will be several pages we have to make. So let's open the Qt Designer here, and you will get this window, and we will start making a main window. You can see there are different things you can do. There's a dialog with buttons, and you can see it has an OK and a cancel. There's another one where they sit up there in the corner, and there's one here without any buttons. But we want to make a main window. So we say choose main window and then create. And then we get a page here. And you can see this one here, I can actually resize and do whatever I want with. So I get it in the size I want my app to be. From that main page, I want different buttons. So over here, I have what's called widgets, and I need to find the widgets called buttons here. So I want some push buttons, and you can see that they are here, and I can simply drag them over into this area as I want. But a good thing is to kind of decide on the layout, how you want it to be. You can do a horizontal layout or a vertical layout. You can arrange it in a grid. There are different options, but let's just say we want to do a grid here. I'll take it from here, and that now I can define an area where I want my buttons to sit. And when I have that, I can simply start pulling over push buttons. And I think now I just start with some here. But the first one here, and you can see by changing the layout here, I can make it in different ways here. But I just choose to make the grid. So I have my buttons here, and the first one here I can rename, and I can say input, fuel, and then there can be one for input, and it can be gas mileage. No, not gas mileage, maintenance tasks. And then there can be an input, other. Oh, I didn't catch it. Input, other expenses. Let's say it like that, just as an example. And this would be my main page, and I can add all kinds of graphical layout to it here if I want. Let's try to start with one of the buttons here. And the way you kind of make the layout for the buttons is you go in here and you go down to style sheet, change style sheet. And in here now you can add different things. So I can say I want to add color to these here, and I want to add background color for my button. And now I can say I want them to be, I want a nice gray. And then I can say I also want a border, and the border color, I can say I want black. And then let's say that's okay. We just go with that, and we say apply. And you can see now I have a gray push button here. And if I want to have the same layout for the other buttons here, I can simply just go into my style sheet, copy this piece here, and I can go into these here and add the same. And now I have push buttons. And I can do the same for the main field here. If I go out into this, and I can say change style sheet for that. And let's say if we want a background color, we can make something gradient here. Let's say, yeah, let's go with this there. That's fine. This purple-ish. And I can put some text in if I want as well over here in the widgets. And we can also apply some formatting here to the style sheet attached to the widget with the header text. So let's just go and make the font a bit bigger here. And now it's time to save the file, and we will just save it in the root of our project folder for PyCharm. So we go and find that down under the C drive and go in under users, and then my user here, and then we need to find the PyCharm projects, and the RV cost tracker. And just in the root of that, that's where I've saved the file. And I'll save it as main.ui. All these graphical interface files, they are named .ui as extension. We will later convert that into .py, so we make py files out of them. I'll show you that in a second. And just the same way as I made the window, I have now just made another window here I call dialog fuel input.ui. And that's where I want to be able to link over to. So you can see I have my main page here, and when I click input fuel, then I want it to open this window here, where I can select the date, I can type in the odometer reading, the fuel amount, the fuel cost per gallon, and then some comments about where did I fill up the fuel tank, and down here a checkbox indicating is it a full tank or not, yes or no, and then submit. See, it's very important to understand that the Qt Designer is only used for creating the layout of your user interface. The whole logic behind when you push the buttons, what happened then, that is something we program in Python, and that won't happen in Qt Designer. That will happen in your editor where you make your Python programs. So what's important now is when we have made a basic layout, then I save these files, and that's the UI files, the main UI and the fuel input UI. These two I use as an example here. And I have saved them in the root of my project folder for my editor, for my Python editor. So to be able to open them with my Python editor, I need to convert them. And that's very simple done. When you stand here and you have your files here in your file hierarchy, you just go up here in the command line and you write cmd. And now you can see here, you get your command prompt opened, and you have the path of the root to your PyCharm project. So I'm in user shoot PyCharm project RV cost tracker. That's where you find it. And to write a Python file out of the UI file, the graphical file, you need to convert it by writing this here, pyuic6. I installed for the Qt Designer, I installed version 6. Some of you might have installed version 5, then you just write 5 instead of 6. But you need to write the number that reflects the version you have installed. Then a space, -x, and here that the X stands for executable. We want to create an executable file. And then here you write main.ui. That was the name of our UI file, the graphical file. And then we write an O for output file. And then we write main.py. That's the new name we want to give it as a Python file. And when you have done that, you simply just press enter and it gets converted. And that takes a little while here. You just wait for it to happen. And let's just check in the file hierarchy if we have it now. And you can see here we now have a main.py file. So it got converted. And then we will do exactly the same for the input file for the fuel mileage. Same thing. And that looks like this. That's a fuel input file, and we convert that one as well. I now open my PyCharm editor, and after converting the files, you can now see, now they are here in the root of my directory. I have the main.ui, but I also have a main.py, and I have a fuel input.ui and a fuel input.py. So here I have my two Python files, and let's try to open the main. And now you can see here we have now from the Qt designer all the code for the whole design. And you can see you could basically sit here and program the whole design by hand, but it would be a huge task. By doing it over in Qt designer, you get all this for free, and you can just convert the file, and now you have at least the layout for the page. And now we just need to work on the functionality of the page, the logic behind. And another little thing we can try is to try to run it. If I go up here, we should get our page open, and you see here it comes, RV cost and maintenance tracker, and I have my buttons and everything here. Okay, now we open the main.py file in PyCharm, so we can start editing some of the code in here, because we want to create that function that when we click the button, then it takes us over to the fuel input file. So the first thing we need to do is that up in top here, we need to add this line here where we call the fuel input file. So that's the other file I have. And from that one, we want to import a UI underscore dialog. And what is that? Let's go over and see here. See, in the fuel input file, I have a class defined called UI underscore dialog. And why is it called underscore dialog? That's because, as you remember, when we created the files in Qt Designer, we could choose either to create a main window, or we could choose to create some files that had some submit buttons in the bottom. And when I made the fuel input file, I made it as a dialog file. So it's the user interface dialog. So that fuel input file is created as a dialog file. Just try to see. When I run it, you can see up in top here, it says dialog. This is a dialog window. Whereas the other one I had, this one here. Oh, let's run that. Oh, it's already running. This one is called a main window. So we have main window types and we have dialog types of windows. And remember that, because that's important. We will have to use that later. So now after you have inserted this line here in top, where we call the other file fuel input, and we call the class that we have defined in fuel input. Now it's time to, here in the class for the main.py file, we have a class called UI main window. So you remember we have the main window type and we have the input type. And this here is a main window. And in that class, we have to add what you see here. So all of this there. We make a new function, basically. And that function here is basically to open the new window. So let's just have a little look at this function here, because this is the key. This piece of code here you can copy every time you want to have this function that you can push a button and something else, another page opens. Whether it's a window, a new window you open, or whether it's a dialog you open, that doesn't really matter. That just changes out a bit what you write here. So the first thing we do is we look at the function here, open window self. So we have a function now called open window that we can call later from the click button. But now we need to define what it does. So that one there the self window, the window that it has to open is the dialog. If it had been a main window, we would have written Q main window here instead. But as it's a dialog file we are linking to, then it's Q dialog here. It's a widget called a dialog. And then self UI, so we now define a UI that we set equal to the user interface in the user interface dialog. That is this UI dialog over in the fuel input file. Then we say the user interface setup is that we want it to open in its own window, a self window. And then I have a little thing here that I have put a hashtag on so it's not executed. But that is when we click a button, then the window we come from, the main window, I can ask it to close that so that it's not open in the background. And I have hashtag that because I actually would like the main window to stay open, and then a new window comes on top of it. And then when I have filled out and submitted, then it just closes down and I'm back at the main window. But if I wanted the main window to disappear, then I would just remove this hashtag here like this, and now you can see now it's active. Then it will close the main window down. But I want it open here, so we hashtag it out. And then self window show. Here we now call to show that window. So you can kind of see, depending on if I make a new button that calls another file, then there will be another file name I have to replace in this here, and there will be another class. So you can see it might be a dialog or it might be a window, so I just replace that. But it's important to keep track of what is the class called here. It's UI dialog, and the file is fuel input. Okay, and there's one thing left we need to do after we have here put in the call to import the class UI dialog from our fuel input file, and then we defined the function open window. Now we need to put in a place here where when we click the push button, that it actually calls this open window function and executes the code described here. And that's a bit further down here. So you basically find here where it says setup user interface. And under that function setup user interface, you can start recognizing from the graphical design here that we have something here called push button 2. You can see all this here, that's push button 2. And then we have some here called push button. That's actually push button 1, and that's the one we are working with. And further down we have push button 3. And that's because we have 3 push buttons on our main side. Why it has just switched the sequence, yeah, I don't know, because that's automatic generated, this code here. But we have to find where it says push button. And at the end of all the code working with push button, which is number 1 actually, there we need to add this here. And it's simply self push button clicked, then connect self open window. That needs to be added at the end of that function for push button 1. And if it had been push button 2 we have been working with, then I would go up here where I find everything about push button 2, and at the end here, right here, I would insert the same kind of code, but just for push button 2. And I can do the same for push button 3. So I can reuse that function, but for every push button, I have to put that line in here. I have to put this piece here in, and then I have to call the file that I'm linking to up in the beginning and the class that is within that file. So you see fuel input has that class here. So I'll try just to run the file now so we can see how it looks. And here comes my RV cost tracker and maintenance, the main page. You see the input other expenses, I didn't make the class or the function in the class that defines that call. I didn't do it for maintenance either yet, but I did for input fuel. So fuel consumption when I want to type that in. So let's try to click it. And you see here, we got the dialog where we now can choose the date. We can put odometer in, we can put fuel amount in, we can put fuel cost in, and then some comments here at the bottom and say, yep, it was a full tank. And then it's ready to submit. Right now we haven't set up the function about submit and where the data needs to go. But at least now we have the main page, and we have tried to make a link over to one of our dialog pages where we can input data from. And that's the same every time. So that function we have just made here, that's important. Keep that piece of code, because you can copy paste it down for every button. So if you're on your main page over here have 3 buttons, you will copy it 3 times and just change the file names and change the class names in it. And then you can reuse that little function again and again. And the next thing we want to do is so that when we click on the submit button, then we want the text fields to be stored in a CSV file, comma separated. And I used to keep track of my fuel consumption in a spreadsheet on my iPad. And I've just taken all the data columns I have here, and I just exported them to a comma separated CSV file. And that CSV file looks like this. So you can see here I have my odometer, my gallons that I have filled in the tank, the price per gallon, whether the tank was full or not when I filled it fuel in, the date I filled it up, and then the comments. And you can see it's all listed here as comma separated, line item by line item. And what I really want is that when I scroll to the end and I make a new entry from the form I just created, I want it to add and become the next line here, line 51. That should be the new, when I push the submit button, then it should keep adding to this file. And to make that happen, I will have to go back over into my fuel input.py file. And this file is where we now need to add some functionality to, so that when I push the push button, it takes the values from the input fields and submit to my txt file, or CSV file, sorry. And I just made a print of the fuel input file I made. And I wrote down just by hand what are the field names for the different input fields I have. So it's easier to find it in the code later. So the first one here is called the calendar widget. The next one here is the line edit. Then you have line edit 2, line edit 3. Then you have a box here called plain text edit. And we have a checkbox down here. And then we have a push button. And then I've done the same here to my Python file, the fuel input.py. And I've simply tried to go into it and organize it a little bit. So I put some line spacing and then a comment here. So say input box 5, that was my date from the calendar widget. And here I have all the coding for that. Made a space and then said input box 1, that's the odometer reading. All the code comes here. Input box 2, that's the fuel amount in gallons, comes here. Box 3, that's the fuel cost in dollars per gallon, comes here. The box 4 is my comments, and then the last part of the code here, that's my push button. So now it's very easy to find where we need to make changes. So the functionality I'm trying to create now is that when I push the submit button, then the content of all these fields we have, the calendar widget and all the text boxes and the checkbox, the content of all of those, I want to submit to this CSV file called Fuel CSV. And if you remember, that's where I imported that from my old spreadsheet that I ran kept track of the fuel consumption in. So I already have a lot of values here. You can see odometer reading, gallons of fuel, the price of fuel, if the tank was full, yes or no, and the dates or some comments. And I want now to be able to push the push button, and then it adds new lines here to that file, comma separated. So that's basically where I want to store all my data. That's in this CSV file. And to do this, I go into the fuel input file. And remember, the fuel input file was the one looking like this. And that's the one I want to work with. In the top of this, that's really where we need to make some changes to it. So you have to go in here where it says class UI dialog. And here we need to define a new function we call save fields. And first I define 5 variables, and I set them equal to the content of the input fields I have on my form. So the first one I call date underscore input, and I set it equal to the content, that's self, of the calendar widget with the property selected date. The second variable is date input. Oh, sorry. Here I get a date over, sorry, for the date input. So the variable date input will now be a date in date format. And I'm working with text fields in a comma separated file. So I need to convert that date to a text string. So I say right after here, date input equals the string value of the date input. Now it's a text string. Next is odometer. That's the odometer reading. And I set that equal to the content of the line edit. That's the first text box I had to type into. And it's the text content I want. Fuel amount is the next variable. Set it equal to the line edit 2.text. And fuel amount again comes over as a number. I need to convert it to a text string. So I again take the string value of it. Then I have fuel cost. It's the content of line edit 3. And I convert that afterwards to a string value. Then I have my comment input field. That's a bigger text box I have. And I set that equal to the plain text edit. That's a big box. And here you need to work with it as a to plain text. Full tank, I set equal to the checkbox, and I want the check state. And if you are unaware of how you know what to write here, let me show you a little trick here. Now I can try to delete this. So when I have the name of the checkbox here as an example, if I now write the dot, look here, now I get from the editor, I simply get suggestions to what I can get over. And I want the check state here, because I want to write, and you can simply test these out if you're in doubt on which one. You can see which ones, this one works for a checkbox, this one works for a checkbox. So it's not all of them that are for a checkbox, but the one that says checkbox out here, these are the ones that are worth trying out. So if you're in doubt of which one, just try them one by one until you figure it out. And here in this case, I just double click that and I get the check state. And the same I have done up with the calendar widget to figure out what is it I need to write here. So the editor helps you a lot here. Next, when I have defined my 5 variables and set them equal to the content of the input fields, now I want to write them to my CSV file. So now I'm still under this save fields function. So I'm still in the same indentation. So I go in and open my CSV file by the file open command, and I open the fuel CSV in the append mode, not the write mode. If you write W, then you will save the new content but delete everything that was in there already. It basically makes it like a clean sheet, and you don't want that. You want to append, you want to add a line, so it's A for append. Then you have the file.write, and I put a /n for new line. Every time I wanted to start on a new line, you can see over here in my CSV file, you can see every entry I have is on a new line where it has all the content. So I start with a new line statement here, and then plus the date input variable, plus then I want a comma and a space. So after the date, write a comma, because it's a CSV file I'm created. So I want it comma separated. Then it's plus odometer, plus a new comma, plus fuel amount, plus a new comma, and so on. All my 5 variables are put in there. And then remember, when you have written to it, always close the file again. So file close. So that's basically the additions that are needed in top here to write the variables or the text fields to variables, or from variables, write them to a file. Then further down in the file here, I need to find where I had my push button. And that piece of code comes down here. I put comments in and separated it a bit so it's easier to read the file. And you can do that as you wish. But this push button here, I need to add a line in. I need to add a click command. And the line I added is this one here. So I go in and say self push button clicked. So if the state of the push button, that's a self, is clicked, then connect. And always when you want an action out of a push button, you want this action described, you need the connect, and then you always need to start with self here in the parentheses. And then you say save fields. Save fields. And that's simply the command you need to add so that when you click the push button, now it saves. And the save field I have here, what is that? Yeah, remember, here I click, I call a function. So when the push button is clicked, I want to activate the function save fields. And save fields, well, that was the one we added up here on top. That was our function called save fields. So that's basically all that is needed to submit the values to a text string. So let's try it out. So let me simply try to run this fuel input file now. Here's my fuel input file, and I can choose a date. Let's say I choose the 25th of March, and my odometer reading is, let's say, 43,250 miles. That's when I fill up the tank. Fuel amount, I get 56.7 gallons. The fuel cost was $4.23 per gallon. And here I can put some comments in. I usually put in where is it I fill up the fuel. So I can say it's Seaside in Oregon. That's where I put fuel in. And then I have this checkbox here for full tank, and let's try to say yes. Why I have this one? That's because when I start calculating miles per gallon, I can only calculate miles per gallon if I fill up the tank completely. Then I have a reference to next time I fill up completely again. Now I know exactly how many miles and how many gallons I have put in. If I don't fill up the tank completely, then I basically don't know how many of these miles I have driven since last time it was filled up refers to the new amount of fuel. So you can only calculate miles per gallon every time you fill up completely. And that's why it's important to know if the tank is full. And if you have an RV, you will realize in ours, the tank is so big. So if I go to a gas station, often it will max out about $100, and you can't put any more in unless you run your car again. So it does happen that you don't fill up the tank completely. But let's try to submit the form here. And I haven't put a close function in or anything so that when it has submitted, then it closes the screen. I'll do that here later. But what we should see now, we should see a new entry. Let me just close this one now. And we go over to Fuel CSV, and you see here is my new entry. What you will see is that it's not quite in the sequence I wanted. I wanted it to start with the odometer reading. My odometer reading comes here, and it should be the first. So I need to swap the sequence a bit. And how do I do that? Yeah, I simply do that up in the right command of my function. So here, where I have all my variables, I just need to move odometer reading to the front. So I need to swap them around a bit. Then you will also see, for instance, for the date here, it writes a lot of other stuff. There is no function here where I only get the date, because here you can see the date 2022, the 3rd month, 25th day. And all the other information I really don't want. And if you look at the formatting I have up here in the other sheet, then it says 2022-02-14. I want this to be the same format. So I basically need to take this variable here, and then I need to use some function to change the content of the variable. So it only says 2022-3-25. I want it to have the same format as up there. So I can do that afterwards now, before I submit it to the CSV file here. The same goes for the checkbox, whether it was a full tank or not. Then it says check state checked. That basically means yes, it was a full tank. And up here you can see I have yes and no. Was it a full tank? Yes or no. And here it says checked. Check state checked. So I need to do a replacement, create a function that replaces check state dot checked with yes, and check state dot unchecked with no. So that's pretty simple. But that I will change up later. That's very easy to make a function that changes the content of a text variable. You can do some replace. But basically it works. We submitted all our values from our form, and they got into our CSV file. So now we can start reading data to the CSV file. And you see this same method here can be used for all my forms, all my input pages. I just do the same to all of them. So I won't show you again for all other pages I make in this app. I just want to show you how do we actually write the text to a CSV file. Well, I think I will end the video here so that it doesn't become several hours long. And then I will split it up so that this here becomes module 1 of making this RV cost and maintenance tracker. And then in the next video, we'll take some other steps, because now we have put data in to our text files. Now we need to look at how do we get the data out. How do we take the data from a CSV file, it is actually, and how do we use them for calculating average gallons per mile, miles per gallon, sorry, and how do we create bar charts showing the gas mileage over time. We will have to create a maintenance schedule for all the planned maintenance so that it can call out a list on monthly basis for our maintenance tasks. And we want to be able to register when we have done the maintenance task and the cost associated with it. So there's still a lot to do, but that will come in future videos that I will post here on Python Advanced Programming. Thank you for watching. And if you are a programmer in Python and you would like to be part of a support group on Facebook, a closed forum where we can discuss Python programming and support each other, please scan this barcode up in the upper left corner, and it should take you to the page where you can apply for membership of the group. Else, if you're new to Python, perhaps you would be interested in the Python Learning by Doing 26 small videos that will teach you all the basics. There will be a link here in the upper right corner for that.